Hello.
All right, we're ready. Oh, okay. Did I just start talking? Did I just go? Yep. Okay. So I can't hear you. Am I standing in a good place? I'm gonna assume that I am. Okay, how are you guys doing? Good? You? Okay, if you guys could put your phones away, that would be great. Not because I don't trust you, but because I just like to see your eyes. You know what I mean? And I know myself, if I have my phone out, I want to check, like, am I getting text? What time is it? Blah, blah, blah. So if you could just put your phone away somewhere off of your desk, that would be wonderful. In your pocket, in your bag, out there, somewhere off of your desk would be perfect. Okay. So it's 7:30. I'm just going to talk to you for a few minutes about my experience in the military. Some of you said you know people in your family who are veterans or friends or relatives. Everybody's got a different experience. There's 2.5 million people in the military currently, but there have obviously been hundreds of millions of people that have served in the military over the course of U.S. history. Okay, so totally different experiences based on what you do, what branch you're in, where in the world you're stationed, and everything. But this was just my experience. And at the end of this, if you have any thoughts or questions about your own personal interest in joining or learning more about the military, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm not a recruiter, so I'm not going to try to sell you on joining. I'm just going to talk to you about what it was like for me. Okay? Is that good for, do you come through pretty good? Okay. All right. What is that a picture of? 9/11. So the reason I'm showing you that is not to start off on just a very somber note, even though it was a somber day, of course. But that was my first week in New York City as a freshman at NYU. Was 9/11, my first couple of weeks. So I was a senior at Sycamore in May of 2001. And then in September of 2001, I was a freshman at NYU. And this happened, and we were very close. Our dorms were really close to the towers, so we heard a lot of stuff, and we saw stuff happen, and it was just a very moving event. So then, as an 18-year-old American, just learned about how the Constitution changed to allow 18-year-olds to serve in the military. And you read all these stories about D-Day and the Civil War and everything. And you sort of thought, after the initial trauma of the event, you sort of thought, like, maybe this is like the time that I'm supposed to do something. And I had a lot of friends that sort of felt similarly. And you're like, why am I different than those guys and girls that did that a long time ago? So that's the event that really got me thinking about the military and all, was just being firsthand account of that day. Okay, so I went to a recruiting office partway through college because I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do after college, but I knew I wanted to serve somehow. I went to all the branches. The Navy was just the one that I just clicked with the best. They had the best recruiters in the New York area at that time. They had the people that were the most informative about telling me about the career options. They had a lot of ways to share how your career in the Navy can connect with your civilian job. I didn't want to stay in the military for my whole life. It was kind of an option, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to. So I was really interested to see, based on what you do in the armed services, how does that connect with you getting a job after those 4 years are up? So I went to a recruiting office. I ended up signing up. And then the first thing they do after college, I went to officer candidate school, which is like a boot camp, essentially. It's 13 weeks of this in Pensacola, Florida. They moved it to Rhode Island, but it used to be in Pensacola. This is what you wear. The nickname for these is called a poopy suit because it's been worn like hundreds and hundreds of times. They just keep washing it and they keep giving it to the next people that show up for boot camp. We had drill instructors like this guy. This guy's name is Gunnery Sergeant Iacovone, United States Marine Corps. I'll never forget his name, even though that was 20 years ago, because you had to say it like that every time you said his name. You couldn't just say Mr. Iacovone or Gunnery Sergeant. You had to say the entire title every time. And if you didn't, you had to do push-ups. And everybody thinks like, oh, how many push-ups did you have to do? The answer is they made you do one more than you could do. So even if you could do 100, they try to get you 101. If you could do 10, they try to get you 11. So they're trying to just push you wherever you are to just be a little bit better than what you were before. So we lived in a big barracks, kind of like this. They showed up at random parts of the day, and they would just get you to do the goofiest things. And these, once you are away from this situation, you're not like having to do the push-ups all the time. They are like the funniest guys ever, because they just come up with the weirdest stuff for you to do, like holding stuff over your head and run. Like they just think of the funniest things. So stepping back after that, you get to really bond with this person once you become an officer and you're done with boot camp. And you really feel like The whole point of them being tough on you was to train you to try to think about other people and not just yourself. Because we're just so much in a tune, especially when we're young, about thinking about like what's good for my career, what's good for my education, and that's great. But this organization is built on you sacrificing for the person next to you. And that was really the mentality that those guys tried to instill when we were down there. But great experience. Boot camp was a great experience. Parents, there they are. There's me as a commissioner. They're very happy. They're very proud. Also a little scared. My parents came from India, so they don't have any experience with the U.S. military. We don't have any family in the military or anything like that. So they were excited, but they're also like, we don't really know like where we're going to go. The world is very much changing right now. 9/11 happened, terrorism. I don't know what this is going to be like, okay? I went to a training school for the supply corps, which was my job in the military. So supply corps would be like, once a ship or a plane or a tank runs out of fuel or runs out of weapons or those guys run out of food, how do you get it? Once the lunchroom runs out of food, how do they get that? There's a whole thing called logistics, and a lot of you have heard that word and maybe even might consider a field in logistics about how stuff gets to where it is. Logistics is a whole problem right now in the world because you got a ton of cargo ships sitting off the coast of California and big shipping ports that don't have enough people to take the stuff off their ship and send it to places in America. That's why some things ship really fast and some things ship after like 6 weeks when you're like, that should have taken 2 days. Has anybody ever experienced that recently? Shipping delays are huge, and maybe not directly in your world, but in worlds that you are associated with, shipping delays are big, and that's all logistics. So that's what I got trained in terms of military logistics. And that school is in Athens, Georgia. If you've never been there, that's a beautiful town. University of Georgia's there, #1 football team in the country right now. But that is a great town to visit. Awesome school. So I was there for about 6 months. These are some of my buddies that are with. I'm the Indian guy here. That's me. But that was an awesome experience too. So you got to see like the school side of the military. So first you're doing like the physical part in boot camp, and then you do like the scholastic part, like the academic part. And they do the same thing we do. They do lectures and tests and notes and all kinds of research and whatever. So some smart guys in the military. My first ship was that ship, and that ship is the USS George H.W. Bush. Who is George H.W. Bush? Former president. Was he the dad or the son? He was the dad, okay? So this ship was built and named after the dad, 41, number 4, 41st president. There's only been 2 father-son president combinations in American history. Anybody government people remember? I told you this first one? Cora? It's cool. It's John Adams and John Quincy Adams a long time ago. Okay, so this ship was the George H.W. Bush, and it was being built. So the really cool thing about this ship is most ships that you serve on in the Navy, they've been around for like 40 years. This ship was brand new, and I was on it when it looked like this, and it's called a pre-commissioned ship, which means it's not yet done being constructed. It's a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. It has 2 working reactors on it. The ship can run without stopping for 50 years. For 50 years, the ship can run without stopping. The only reason it has to stop is because crew morale gets low. When you're at sea for 50 years, you probably get a little depressed. So because of crew morale and like wanting to see stuff and people wanting to get off the ship, they stop every few months when they're at sea. But they don't need to stop. It's an amazing engineering feat as the U.S. aircraft. Parents, very excited, little scared, not sure what to think. I think I know what that is, but not really. We saw Top Gun. That was cool. So this is what it looked like when it was done. It is the size of the Empire State Building turned on its side. That's how long the ship is. It is 17 stories from top to bottom. It's like a small floating city. There's about 5,000 people who live on it. It carries 85 aircraft on this part's called the flight deck, the very top of it. And that includes helicopters and jets and surveillance planes, drones, and all kinds of stuff. So amazing engineering feat, but that's what I got to serve on. And we did tours at sea, and we were at sea for about 8 months. We stopped in Dubai, which is a really cool city, which I'll tell you about in a second. We stopped in Lisbon, Portugal, and we stopped in the island of Cyprus, which is in the Mediterranean. It's like a Greek island. It's like part Greek and part Turkish. But military takes you places that you would never, as a 21, 22-year-old, ever probably think of going. Because there's just some really unique things that you have to do and see. And it also gives you jobs that you would never do. Like, I drove that. There's very few 22-year-olds that can say they drove a 5,000 person Empire State Building long 17-story two nuclear reactor vessel in the ocean, in the middle of the ocean. There were times where they stopped the ship and they let us jump off. That was really cool. Like in the middle of the Arabian Sea with nothing around, they would stop the ship, turn off all the engines, and they'd have like organized like jumping off they'd lower the flight decks down, and it was about 20-foot drop. And you get to jump, and they have like search and rescue guys out here in case people weren't good swimmers trying to join the Navy and you're not a good swimmer. But there was a guy like that. He's the guy who jumped off right in front of me. So they had this huge line, and they're like, okay, everybody's jumping off. Like you can swim around and you can come back. We'll have this rope. And the guy in front of me was this 18-year-old kid from somewhere. And you know, you jump, and the next guy gets up, and they wait until the guy goes before, and then that guy jumps, and then he jumps, and as he's falling, goes, I can't swim, splash. And we're like, dude, you're in the Navy. Why can't you swim? So that's why they have these divers who come and rescue the person. But that was a very fun experience too. This is how we lived on the ship. So I had 6 people in my room. This is like so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6 is kind of right here. Like I was taking this picture from my berthing area, like my bunk. So it's not a very big room, and they all have different schedules. So one of the guys that I lived with was a nuclear engineer. So his job was working on the reactor, and he had to get up all night because the engine is running all the time. My job was supply, so I had a different shift. There's another guy who was in aviation, so he had to go whenever we were launching jets. He was awake. So we all had different schedules. We didn't see each other a ton, but that's how we lived. And the smaller ships, it can be even more people living on that. So for 8 months, that was my house. Flight operations in the military is really cool, even if you're not like a super like military airplane person. It's just cool to see that amount of force being launched off of a ship. So basically, it's not like when you're on an airplane in a commercial plane when you're flying somewhere where they have this nice, long, slow, gradual takeoff. Flight operations on a ship is pretty much, the runway is really short compared to a normal airport runway that you would go on like Delta. So pretty much the planes are hooked onto what's called a catapult, and the catapult just throws the planes off at like hundreds and hundreds of miles an hour. So these pilots are just sitting there, and then all of a sudden they're in the air. So it's a really amazing thing to watch, flight operations. So I got to launch planes off of the flight deck, which was really cool. You really do feel like you're in Top Gun when you do that, but that was a really neat thing to see. Those are probably some of the most talented people in the whole world, are those fighter pilots. Okay, so the coolest port visit I made, because that's always a question I get asked, it was Dubai. Anyone ever heard of Dubai? Okay, what do you know about Dubai? Anyone know anything, like something that stands out in your mind or what you've heard about it? It's expensive. It's super expensive. Anything else? A lot of gold. That's true. It's a lot of money coming from a lot of places. Yeah, that's right. Burj Khalifa, that's the hotel, right? The one that's shaped like a sail. It's a very tall building. So Dubai, good anecdote. So Dubai is a city in a country called the United Arab Emirates. It's right on the edge of the Persian Gulf. That's like a friendly port to us. There's some countries that are in the Persian Gulf that are not as friendly to us when we went over there. This was a friendly one. So it's close to the not friendly ones, which is why we kind of made a port there, because we could be accessible when we needed to get places we need to go. But a ton of money. The ruling family is called a sheikh. That's a ruler. He's like kind of a king. There's people from all over the world because they've invited corporations and businesses from everywhere to like camp out there. So people come from everywhere to live in Dubai. They have so much money that this sheikh, for his birthday, asked that they build an island shaped like a palm tree, like in the ocean. And they did it. This is the island. So they just said, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And they built him an island that's shaped like a palm tree. And then he asked for the biggest birthday cake that's ever been made. And that's what they did. They said, we're fine. We're going to build you the biggest birthday cake that's ever been made. So Dubai was a really cool place. There's a mall inside of it. I don't know about that. Oh no. There is a ski slope inside of that mall, the mall that you mentioned. It's a mall. It's a hotel shaped like a giant sail. And inside there's a mall, and inside that mall there's a ski slope. So you can like sit there and shop and go to the food court and watch people skiing. It's like a glass enclosed mall. Really cool. So never would have gotten to see that if I had not been at the Navy. This is George W. Bush. He's the son of George H.W. Bush. And he was the president when the ship was done being built. So he came to the ship when it was done, and he like gifted it to his dad, which was a really cool thing because his dad was getting older. And he said, it was one of the last things he did as president was he came to the ship and said, I really want to give this to my dad. And so that we saw that ceremony right before I left my sea ocean part of the Navy. Okay, parents, very excited, scared, not sure what happens next. I lived there for about 2.5 years, so I still have two years left. 4-year service. Oh, there's me. Boy, I look tough, don't I? Sure do, except for that tag. I wish that wasn't there, but. So, why is this Navy guy wearing a bunch of green? Think I'm going to land or sea? Land, right. So, the Navy started to realize about halfway through these wars we've been in that they didn't have enough people joining the land side of the military, okay? A lot of people were in the Air Force and the Navy. Not as many were joining the Army and the Marine Corps. And part of the reason was those guys were going for a long time to some land countries, Afghanistan and Iraq. So they started this program called Blue to Green. All right, what color do you think of when you think of Navy? What color do you think of when you think of like Army? Yeah, so pretty much they individually take people from the Navy, temporarily retrain you, and send you with an Army unit for about a year. And they send you to whatever country they need you to go to. Because they said, you guys are already in the military, so we can probably just transition you guys faster than recruiting more people for the Army. So that's what I did. I went to a place called Afghanistan. If you don't know where it is, I didn't know exactly where it was when I first went, but I learned. It's just a little bit northwest of India, a little bit northeast of Saudi Arabia and the African continent, south of Russia. So it's a very landlocked country. It's mountainous. It has beautiful forests. They get tons and tons of snow. It has deserts. It's all kinds of things. So I went there for a year with the Army. We did Army training. We did like all this forest navigation stuff, which I never had thought that I would do. And then we went with the Army. And my job there, oh yeah, parents scared, a little scared now. They're very proud, excited, but now they're more on the scared thing. My job there was civil affairs, which I'll tell you about in a second. But the training for that was we went on a military hired plane and we lived in the desert. This is like the tents that we lived in the desert to do the training for like land-based military stuff. Because I had just done the water training stuff, not the land. Totally different experience, totally different type of military members that I interacted with, still all great guys and girls, but very different. We lived in Kuwait in the middle of the desert doing training for a couple weeks, and then they flew us into Afghanistan on a big cargo plane. So I worked in civil affairs, which means that I went like village to village, and I tried to help all the local people build their schools and like their local governments and hospitals and roads. Afghanistan is a pretty country. It's just a very challenged country. The average lifespan there is about 43 years old. That's the average lifespan. Most of the families have about 8 to 10 kids, and most of them farm. So there's not a ton of education, definitely not for women. And there's not a ton of development. There's very few roads. A lot of people live in the same village that them and their grandparents, their great-grandparents lived in. And they stay that way. So we lived in these little huts. So we would find the bigger areas that were more cleared out and build these huts. And a lot of soldiers and sailors would live in those. And then we drove around in these up armor kind of Humvees. So that's the inside of the Humvee that I was in. This guy's name is Matt Benevenia. He's an Air Force guy, so he was also a blue to green guy. But we had to learn how to do all the Army stuff. So we had to learn how to like this person standing outside like the turret that's like outside the Humvee. But all this equipment we didn't really ever get trained on until we switched to Army. So we drove in convoys all around the country. One of the coolest things we got to do and see was when you think Sycamore's roof is leaking, okay, just remember that this is school in Afghanistan, all right? For a lot of girls and a lot of boys, it looks like this. And the coolest thing about this group of young women was their school kept getting bombed overnight because there was a group of people who were in charge of the country called the Taliban that did not want women to go to school. So we would build these schools for women, and they would find out, and then overnight they would bomb them because they'd say, like, you guys shouldn't even be at this school. Girls don't need to go to school. And these girls, they didn't have any weapons, any armor, anything. They would just come back and ask us, could you please just rebuild the school? That's all we want. And we just rebuild the school. So they just wanted that much to have some kind of a better life. That was their passion. And that was a really inspiring thing. There's a lot of good people there. But that was a cool part of the job is you get to see that. You get to see like humanity in a totally different side of the world where they don't have anything. So the next time Sycamore's roof leaks, just think. least not that, right? Hey, there's me. Almost at the end of my military service. Came back from Afghanistan, healthy, happy. Everything went great. They did a little party for a bunch of us that were exiting the military at that time because that was the end of my 4 years of service. They did a big thing on a ship. I don't think any of these guys actually did like that because I was following, but they were like mandated to do it. So, and parents happy, not much more relieved, not as scared because now I'm done. And that's it. I think that's the end of my story. Okay, that's the end. Yay! Any questions? I have a couple more minutes here. What questions about anything military do you have? You can ask stupid questions like, what did they eat? How did you guys get from like all that stuff? Yeah. We learned a little bit of Dari, which is the local language in Afghanistan, but we went around with a translator. So the military hires translators because they know that most Americans don't know those languages well enough. But it was funny when Afghans saw me, like before. So India and Afghanistan used to share a border, and then Pakistan was created in the 1940s. Okay, but before that, India and Afghanistan were like neighbors. So we would go to villages, and the really old villagers that had been around prior to 1940 would kind of like, they would like double take when they saw me. They'd be like, "Wait a minute, this is one more guys. This is a guy that we, like they didn't, but we had translators where we went to help us with the culture." So, good question. What else? Question. Yeah. We saw combat in Afghanistan. Like my unit was in a combat situation once in a village where it was really tiny and we were in the middle of the mountains. And like my role wasn't combat, but we were with the guys that were doing the combat. And the village that we were trying to help build schools for, the village got attacked in the night. And so we had to go out and get these guys and whatever. And our guys were really good. It was we only had maybe 20 soldiers at that whole base, including us. And but it ended well for us. So yeah, that was a long time. Yes.
I'll say it loudly. When you switch from blue to green, how did the green reactor treat you? Like the original arm?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's a lot of cultural differences. It's just like if you guys went from here to Mason, right? You're all high school students. You are all trying to get well educated, but there's some cultural differences about being in there. It was a little funny because they were kind of protective about like their army, like being army when I was coming from the Navy. And you kind of have to go into it thinking like, all right, these guys think that the Army's better than Navy. So I'm just going to let them think that. But they were much more open to us because they knew that they needed numbers, like they knew they needed help in civil affairs, like going village to village. They didn't have enough people to do that. So like initially they were kind of like, oh guys, these guys are just Navy. Like, what are they going to do? But when it came down to it, I think they appreciated the fact that we were all kind of pitching in to help. So, good question. What else?
Do you think any of your jobs, like civil affairs, was that?
Yeah, civil affairs was picked for me. But my supply job, I got to like, it's like you get matched. It's almost like when you apply to college. Like you say, hey, here's the job that I want, and then the jobs say, here's the people that we want to fill it. So you can list a priority. You can say, I would like supply, and then something else, and then something else, and then if they want to, they'll pick you for one. Good question. What else? Good questions. You guys have good questions.
The rank, the armed forces, we talked about this yesterday, respectively. Like, which would be the most difficult or to the least?
Which one's the best? Navy.
Which one's the best?
Navy. The most like physically difficult. Is that what you mean? Or anything?
You talk about it.
Okay. I would say it's tough. I mean, I think they all have their own strengths. Like, I think the strength of the Air Force is it's very technical. So if you're a person who's into like computers or any kind of scientific type field, even medicine and stuff, Air Force tends to have a lot of jobs that are good for that type of mind. The Navy and the Army are the biggest, so they're the most diverse. Like you see people from everywhere in the Navy and the Army, and those are the places that will take you to really like the thing about the Navy that's cool is your bases that you could get stationed at are like Pearl Harbor, Japan, San Diego, like beautiful. You have to have a big, beautiful beach to have a Navy base. So like that is really cool about the Navy. All the Army places, they're just in the middle of some nowhere forest and like they just have to do whatever there. Army, I would say they are the biggest branch. And I think they probably have to do the most like heavy lifting of the military. Like when people have to do long-term, I mean, like strategy type stuff as Army and Marine Corps, I would say physically is probably the hardest. So, yes.
Army, Navy, hybrid.
Great question. The Marine Corps is actually a subset of the Department of the Navy, which is why we had Marine Corps drill instructors in our boot camp, because there isn't a separate Marine Corps branch. It's so small that it kind of falls under the Navy. So yeah, good question. Yeah. How difficult is it to become a SEAL? Very difficult. So after all that boot camp stuff, you have to go to a totally different training. And you have to do stuff that will like physically and mentally push you to the edge of everything that you have, like sleep deprivation, but still being able to do like military type functioning, being dropped into the ocean and like maybe simulating just barely being able to breathe and how to get out of that. Like you have to do crazy stuff. And I had a couple guys who were SEALs in my unit, and they were formerly SEALs, and then they like kind of chose a different career, and so they came into the supply corps, but they would tell these crazy stories. And they just thought a different way. Like we were out at a restaurant with a couple guys that were SEALs, and it was getting kind of later, so we were all calling cabs, like getting rides, whatever. And the two SEALs just said, "We're gonna run home." We're like, "Dude, it's like 11 o'clock. You live 12 miles away." He's like, "No, we're just gonna run home." And they just ran. We're like, "What?" I would never do that. I would never do that. But they did it, and they're fine. They don't do that, but they just think in a different. SEALs just think in a different way. One question I always get is, what did you eat on the ship? And the answer is, it's kind of like school lunch, except without the applesauce. So here, yeah. So here you have like lunches that show up on a regular basis. We had that too. The difference is you could tell when you weren't near any land, because when you're on the ship, you have no idea where you are in the world. But when you were not near land, you would start seeing the same thing show up on the menu, like over and over again. Like they take all the leftovers and turn it into something else and serve it. And then they would make it like ground beef, and you're like, okay, we just had hamburgers, so like, where's this coming from? Like the further you got from land, the more you see these recycled menu options. So that was really funny, but that wasn't even the most important thing on the ship. What do you think? What do you think was the most important to crew morale on the ship? Anyone have a guess? Crew morale. What do you think? If you guys were on a ship that long, hang on a second, what would you want to see or hear first or have? What would you miss the most? Bathroom. We did have bathrooms. They weren't very great bathrooms, but we did have bathrooms. That's not a bad guess. What else? What would you miss the most? I know you guys thought. I could see it. I could see the wheels. People. You're exactly right. So mail was the biggest thing that was related to crew morale. Was mail. It wasn't food. Everybody thought, oh, don't you want good food? Don't you miss having? Yeah, but like I miss my friends and my family, So whenever we were refueling, the way the ships refuel is they just drive up next, not drive, but they kind of sail up next to each other. And literally a guy shoots a rope gun. It's a gun that just shoots a rope to the other ship. Somebody catches it, and then they start stringing a bunch of lines across, and they put like food on a pallet, and they just wheel it over from one ship to the other. Okay, and they do this for like 5 hours. And the biggest thing that everybody freaked out about if you drop stuff would always get dropped in the ocean, accidentally. And when food and stuff got dropped in, nobody really, everybody cared, but not really. But when mail got dropped, it was like crisis. Like we had to stop and try to get it, because morale is such a huge thing on a ship. And you'd be surprised when you're away from your family and friends for 8, 10 months, a year. Some of these guys are going for 15 months. Your thought and feeling about your connection with those people that you love and care about at home, it just evolves a lot over the course of those 15 months. For better or worse, but you just miss people. So mail, that's a good answer. So mail and people was the thing that I think was biggest connected to morale. So. Yes.
You're on a boat, somebody's eating
ship, yeah.
You can't get away from them. How do you deal with that conflict with your?
That's a good question. A couple of guys made poor decisions and got into fights, but they got some discipline for that. There's actually a brig on ships, which is like a little tight type of jail where you get bread, but they don't do bread and water anymore. But you get sent to the brig. The captain would actually send people to the brig when they got into fights. But most of the time, I would say conflict, you are forced to figure out how to resolve it face to face with that person in a way that you guys know, like you're going to be serving together for a year. So you can't not do anything, right? You try to distance yourself as much as possible, but on some ships, it's a lot tougher. A submarine is really tough to like escape where other people are at. I never got sent to the brig. Yeah. But I saw where the brig was. That was really interesting. So the captain on a ship that big has a really crazy role because he has to be in charge of the ship and the safety, the morale of the crew. He's like public relations to the world and home when they ask what's happening with the ship. It's always his face that's on there, and he has to present this really good image. And he's kind of like the judge and the jury because they don't have time to say, let's talk about it, let's figure it out, everybody come to a counseling session. It's like, sorry, we don't have time for this. Like, you're going, you know. Yes.
Did you guys like have any like special like codes that you like unspoken codes that you operated by? Like, you know, the code in the street is snitches get stitches. Like,
oh yeah.
The Navy's code.
I got you. Did we have any special codes? So the Navy's code is honor, courage, commitment. So we tried to base what we did around that. And even though that was like a cheesy kind of code, they do drill it into you to the point where like at night you're reciting it like on cue. And you know that those are the things that you're supposed to care about. And those are the things that you're supposed to impart on the people around you. So like in terms of code, I would say honors, courage, commitment. I will never forget it because you can think about it in everything that you're doing like day to day. Okay, I think I might have to run here, but I appreciate all the thoughts and attention and questions. And if you have any others, you can always find me. Thank you.
Thank you. Boards, classes, clap, 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 clap. All right, y'all.
Okay.